I was complimenting Steve the other day because I was watching his build show video, and he was showing this plan of a stair detail, and I think he called out a 7 and like 15, or no, it was 5/16 rise. And it's like, man, on my prints that I get, it just shows the location and says stairs built per IRC. Like, he's actually giving me the rise. I don't have to sit there and do
I'll
math.
tell you
I can
what.
cut stringers.
I'll tell you exactly the secret to my personal secret. I draw stuff I'm deathly afraid of making a mistake about. Right? I've been in so many houses where stairs don't work. I mean, how embarrassing is it if you designed a 3,000 square foot house and as you walk down the stairs, you bang your head and you're 6'1", right? That's pretty embarrassing. So, I mean, window schedules, I probably review them 5 times before I'm good with it. Like 5 different times, not in a row. I'll shelf it and 2 days later, look at it again and maybe go from the bottom of the schedule up just so that I don't glaze over the same things.
And then I get the window schedule and I go over it at least another 3 or 4 times before I put the order in. Same thing, separate occasions.
Yeah. And honestly, in 30 years, I've still had window schedules. You get there and it's like a window's the wrong size or it's like something. And it's like, how the hell does this happen? Like we fret and fret and fret over it and it still happens. But
you need a better architect, Travis.
I kind of like an architect to leave me some room to solve the problems myself. I like to provide my own solutions. It makes me flexible and allows me to move through the process the way I like. But it is nice to have a little bit of guidance every once in a while to not have to go, let me spend the afternoon figuring all this out and then tomorrow I'll build it if it's already figured out.
That's where the bad business is right there, Travis. I'll spend the afternoon to figure this out. Is the client paying you to spend the afternoon to figure that out?
No, I'm a hobbyist at that point. Joe and I have a number of not-for-profit organizations that we operate over here at Catalyst. I mean, we're really good at finding new and creative ways to lose money.
One of the most respected builders I've ever worked with said, I'm not interested in figuring things out. My job is to build it.
I like both sides, but yeah, I do see the wisdom in there is something valuable in making money. I'm going to try that. Maybe 2020 a year.
Yeah, the longer I go along, the more I want it spelled out on the prints for me because I don't want to spend the time. Like Steve just said, my job is to be there and to execute. And I will take the time to figure this stuff out, but it becomes a nuisance.
Well, what about, Ben, do you ever get the plans that have all the information and then it doesn't quite match the field conditions? Like I do a ton of remodeling and it's really common for me to have contractor field verify on every note, every page. And, you know, we've had entire floors misalign per plan. And like, well, I'm glad I checked it because if I had just built it, when I cut the hole in the wall to marry the two, you know what I mean?
I always check stuff like that, and it's pretty routine on remodels for me to find, you know, like in the overall size of a footprint, a couple inch discrepancy or something like that.
I don't think you're going to find a situation where that doesn't exist, but I will tell you this, Travis, I am very diligent about ensuring that the first floor plan and the second floor plan and roof and everything is fully coordinated, meaning that the stair is in the right place, the envelope is the same dimension so that when you find a discrepancy of 2 inches, then you know that everything is 2 inches off. It's not the stair is 2 inches off on the first floor one way and it's a ½ inch off the other way on the second floor.
That makes sense.
It's okay to have a mistake as long as it's consistent.
Totally get that. I delayed the start of the show by my sidebar. Let's start the show.
I was gonna say you totally did, except for that was a really transition.
Yeah,
so
they're right.
I thought I was in charge tonight. You're in charge tonight now. So let's kick it off.
Take it away, Emily.
So good evening. Welcome to the BS and Beer Show. BS stands for Building Science. Tonight we are going to talk about dealing with transitions. I am Emily Mottram. Tonight I am having I'm having a switchback IPA from Burlington, Vermont. So sort of close by. We want to encourage other local groups to form their own in-person groups with BS and Beer. Just don't trademark the name. If you need help setting up your own local group, or you want to talk to some of the other ones that are already formed, go to the bsandbeershow.com to look at some of the stuff we've put together and things that people have tried. We want to thank our media partners, Green Building Advisor and Fine Home Building, for helping us put on this show every week. And I'm going to turn it over to Mike to tell you how the show works.
Thank you, Emily. I'm Mike Maines. Tonight I am drinking a Rising Tide maple. It's a maple golden ale called Nature's Gold. It's mapley. If you like a sweet beer, it's good. It's a little sweet for me, but it's what I have, so it's what I'm drinking. Just a quick note. We've had a few comments that Fine Home Building sends out Zoom reminders every week, but the topic is never included, and that's just an automated Zoom thing. If you want to know who's speaking and what the topic is, join our mailing list. You can go to the bsandbeershow.com to join our mailing list, and we'll send you 2 announcements each week that have all the important details. Or you can check out Kylie's weekly post at Green Building Advisor. That also has the same information. For the agenda tonight, it's a little bit loose, but we'll start out with some introductory comments from our guests, and then we'll have a panel discussion, and that will roll into a sort of a free-form audience and panel discussion, and we'll wrap up by 7:30 Eastern Time. The video recording of tonight's show will be available at Green Building Advisor on Sunday, and we encourage you to continue any conversation over there. And past shows can be found on our YouTube channel. Just search for the BS and Beer Show, or through a link at our website, thebsandbeershow.com, or through our section at Green Building Advisor. That is enough for now. I will turn it over to Kylie for tonight's announcements.
Hello, everybody. I am Kylie Jacques, and I'm the senior editor at Green Building Advisor. Tonight, I'm back to my old Topo Chico with a grapefruit twist. And for announcements, we have Travis's BS and Beer in Kansas City is going to be hosting Christine Williamson and Justin Fink to talk about education and how we teach and learn durable building science details so that they translate in the field and are actually built that way. That will be on December 1st at 4 p.m. Central Time. And you can find details about that at the bsandbeerkc.org. We encourage you to pick up this book, Healthy Buildings, How Indoor Spaces Drive Performance and Productivity by Joseph Allen and John McComber. We're in the thick of reading it as a group, and we'll be discussing it with a few of our audience members on December 17th. So it'd be fun to have audience participation on that one. And beginning next week, you'll be able to find the audio-only version of the BS and Beer Show wherever podcasts are found, just to alert you to that. I think that's all for me. Travis, you're going to introduce our guests?
It would be my great pleasure. These guys are both awesome. So I'm excited to introduce Steve and Ben tonight. Steve's a good friend. He's a nationally recognized architect who's been in the building industry for over 30 years. Throughout his career, he's designed hundreds of projects across the spectrum of energy performance and sustainability, with distinct notoriety in the residential construction sector. His commitment to his clients equates beautiful aesthetics with trusted durability, health, comfort, and environmental responsibility, and energy efficiency for that matter. His work extends from the Northeast, which he calls home, across the US, and he serves clients with passions that align with his own. Ben is a second-generation high-performance builder working as a production manager for a residential builder in Portland for just a little longer, right, Ben?
Yeah, for about a week and a half at this current job.
Gotcha.
That'll be my neighbor.
And that's another transition we'll be talking about in this show.
Right.
But Ben has over 20 years of job site experience, ranging from conservation work of early 18th century homes to building cutting-edge, low-energy houses and high-end custom millwork. Welcome to the show, gentlemen. It's great to have you both. What are you drinking, Ben?
This evening, I'm having a sparkler from local Lone Pine Brewing, about 2.5 miles from where I sit right now.
It's a solid start. Anything else you want to tell us that I didn't throw in your bio there? I mean, you are moving and you're going to do a different job now, right?
Yeah, so I currently I'm listed as a production manager on my business card with Colbert Building, which basically sees me straddle the line somewhere between a lead carpenter and a traditional production manager. And I'm transitioning into being a true to form project manager for a green builder down in Western Connecticut, who all they've done for 25 years is high performance green building, sustainable building, and really looking forward to it.
What's the name of the company, Ben?
It's BPC Green Builders.
Okay.
They are the current FHB house
Yeah.
project that Find Home Building is showing.
That's perfect. I'm sure you'll be an asset to the team.
I hope so.
Speaking of an asset, Steve Baczek.
Nice
What are you
transition.
drinking, brother? I had to give you a little hell with that scowl on your face.
You did not break out the smile, Travis.
He's gonna smile there.
There it
He's
is, a little
smiling.
bit. What do you got? A cup of coffee, a little water, iced
The
tea?
mystery.
Glass of milk.
Ooh.
Moonshine.
Steve, what are you working on lately, man? What's going on?
What am I working on lately? We are, I'm actually going down to see a project with Jake next week. We have that, our board form concrete pier house down there, well under construction. It's all framed up and got some exciting things on that one. That's the one that has the cantilever deck, thermally broken. It has, Michael Maines will greatly appreciate this. It has a 1 in 12 fully vented roof system that is even locked into a vertical wall, and we still have a way for it to work. So
Nice.
it, yeah, some exciting stuff. Got stuff all over. We just broke ground on a house down in Amarillo, Texas. Got wrapping up Doug Asano's house down in Charlotte, North Carolina. It's coming out really nice. Wrapping that up, and yeah, got a handful of other stuff. Was just down in Atlanta for the day yesterday, starting 2 projects. So always something to do, man. Always somebody out there that wants something.
All right, so now it's time to kick off the show. I think the plan was for you guys to share some details and talk about transitions, and we'll go from there. So, Steve, I think you have the ability to share whenever you'd like.
I'll give Ben the opportunity or the choice to go first or second.
I think why don't you tee it off, Steve?
Okay.
and just
So you
let's
want me
dive
to
into some
embarrass you
section.
right from the get-go?
Yeah. Please. I just want you to stick your foot in your mouth first.
Not going to happen. All right, I will. So honestly, I've been giving this a lot of thought about this word transition, and I rather than show you a slideshow, I just have a CAD file. We can breeze through some drawings, but the idea of transition in our industry has far more outreaching connotation than, say, just in the drawing details, right? So I jotted down some notes here this past week. And one of the things is as an architect in my personal career, there's a transition in time, right? Everybody knows the kind of 100-hour or 1,000 or 10,000 hour rule. That's what it is, right? Which is basically like 10 years or something to become good at what you're doing. But I think there's a transition period in everybody's career in the industry where you kind of migrate from I think I know to, yes, I do know what I'm doing, right? I mean, everybody starts out, even the best of carpenters, best of architects, designers, plumbers, electricians, everybody starts out with, oh yeah, I can do that. And then they walk away going, oh crap, I never did that before. How do I do that? Right. And I mean, that was my very first passive house 11 years ago. Guy said, oh, do you want to, I'm thinking about doing a passive house. I excused myself, went into the powder room, Googled passive house, came back out and said, oh yeah, that's not a problem. That's a set of building parameters. It just got brought over from Germany and et cetera, et cetera. And then we figured it out. But I think that, the important moral of the kind of career transition is to not be afraid of it, to be confident in such that we can figure it out. And there's other people in the industry that we can search out to help us figure it out and become better at what we do, and to, you know, not just give up and say, no, I'm not going to do that. So I think that's, you know, kind of the global transition, if you will. But when I think about buildings and projects in specific, there's a lot of transitions that happen along the way. The first of which is clients approach us and hire us, and they bring a set of dreams. And then we have to take those dreams and transition them into some type of architectural thought process and basically make sense of them, right? And we have all, I'm sure, had the clients that bring stuff that, yeah, that's not going to work. We're not going down that direction, or it's not going to fit. But we have to transition those thoughts. And then once I do have my thoughts together, then I have to transition those to some plan, right? I have to figure out, okay, how am I going to lay out this set of drawings? What are the important features of all of these thoughts that make up this project? And then how do I translate that or transition that information into my plan? And then once I have my plan, I need to work with the builder, because the builder needs to then transition the plan into the built form. So there's a lot of these places where this idea of transition goes on that is just not only, I know you guys probably thought, hey, let's just talk about how we transition from the foundation to the wall, or from the wall to the roof. But I think there's some larger transitions. And then the build, we have the whole idea of details that we will talk about here, and how those translate or transition to success, right? How do we deal with things like continuity and making sure that things are being installed right, built right, detailed right, etc. So I don't know if who's ever playing God this evening, if they could give me screen share, or do I just take it over?
Should be able
I'd
to.
say, yeah, we gave you permission. You should be able to hit the screen square. Yeah,
You
there you
should be
go.
seeing a CAD file here.
Yep.
Yep.
Okay, so for all of those that don't do CAD, at least this is what it looks like behind my curtain, right? So we have a series of plans, elevations, building section, etc. And again, this whole transition of how do we transition this information? And, you know, we can get into some of the details, because those are probably a little bit more interesting. And then I'll breeze through some of the other drawings. But this was an 800 square foot passive house. This was the one where we hung the 14-inch floor trusses off of the outside. And you can see in here, there's a lot of places where we transition from a horizontal to a vertical, right? Slab to foundation wall. So we have this detail. We have where we transition from top of wall to floor frame. And in this case here, not only do we have the exterior wall frame, but we have what I called the insulation sweater on the outside of the building. And then how do we transition that, right? We have to connect it, and there's a whole bunch of things to worry about there. And then as we go up, the wall thinned out, the insulation practice changed, and we have some transitions in here. And then of course, anytime you have a window, you poke a hole in the wall, and we have those transitions, and then transitioning from the vertical wall to the sloped scissor truss. All right, so if we go over here, and keep in mind, some of these are a little high in R values, but this is old world passive house. The new passive or new FIAS calculations would help us degrade some of these R values a lot. But this one we're not going to spend a lot of time on, because we've seen this a lot. Whole bunch of insulation underneath, turns the corner, encapsulates the slab, and then runs up the wall. And then at the wall, this is where a lot of things happen. We have to maintain continuity in our insulation. But one of the things that we were concerned about here was, what if water did get in this area here, this interstitial space of the open web truss? How do we get it out? And how do we solve for water management there? And for those of you that have heard me speak before, water management is always top of my list, because if it don't last, it don't matter. So anyways, we actually used some synthetic decking. We closed this off. We have a little 3/16 inch airspace with a bronze screen that we ran underneath here. And so if water did get in here, it would migrate down and come through these cracks and basically just drip out. Now, for those of you that would say, well, that's really great, Steve, but why would you put holes in where you have insulation? Well, a couple of things at play here. One, the air barrier is the zip wall that is in the middle of the wall here. So I'm not challenging the air barrier in any way. And the small pockets of air that get in here and cool this insulation in this area, this is probably about R140 across this section here. So if I'm going to give up a little R value in good faith of water management, that is certainly a place to do it. The other thing here is the transition of structure, right? You can put on these trusses, but how do we attach them? You can see we have screws here at 16 inches on center vertically and horizontally, but we actually put a 2x4 ledger in here, and we had a knockout built into the truss. So it made it real easy. These trusses were 14 foot tall, 14 inches deep, and they could be installed by one person because you had a second person in this ledger. People would set the trusses down there, plumb it up, drop a couple screws in, and then they would come back later and add the additional screws. But it was pretty easy to install those. As we go up here to the band joist area where the wall transitions, and we did have a small little loft up there, we had, again, water management issues of how do we deal with that. And you can see here we have a copper metal cap. Notice that it is sloped, so it adheres to the down and out principles of proper water management. And that copper metal cap goes back all the way back to the zip wall. It doesn't come up here and get taped to the polyiso here. It actually goes back. And I have a really good picture. I don't have it here, but that I use when I present a full length presentation. But Farley stopped all the polyiso here so that he could make this connection. And then he simply pieced in the polyiso here after the copper guy was done with his work. So there's a transitional event that builders have to deal with sequentially to ensure that things like this flashing are getting installed properly, and they're getting installed all the way back to the proper place that they should be installed. It'd be very easy for a builder to say, yeah, screw it, just run the insulation in, we'll have the copper guy cut it short, we'll turn it up here and we'll just tape it off. But that's not the proper way to do it. And then, proper thermal management. You can see we have the insulated wall there. We have 2 layers of polyiso on the outside. We have our rain screen here. This one here is an open planked rain screen, so that we have all those proper transitions in the control layers, and they're all working in concert with each other, right down to, you can see we put a sloped kerf on every one of the planks so that any water that got in would also adhere to that down and out principle there. Of course, windows are always, a transitional sequence in building. We take a wall, we poke a hole in it, now we fill the hole with a window, but we have to manage all of our control layers there. You can see here, this one here has a back dam, and it also has a slope sill, and the slope sill goes up our membrane up over the top of that. The window gets installed. In this case here, we do have some rigid insulation, although I don't practice that much anymore. And then the window gets installed, and then obviously the transitions of all the finishes and that getting attached, and even having a shim on top of the rigid insulation so that we have this ability for air to circulate around our system there. And then of course you can, the transition of the window detail in jam detail. The head detail of the window. These are all triple glazed macro win windows. They're wood frame with a, you can see the, aluminum face there, clad window. But basically goes up all of that same rain screen. We have proper water management here in that our rain screen is proud of the head trim here, so that we have that ability to, again, to drain out, so that there's all these proper transitions of water management, that this house at every nook and cranny has the potential to dry and drain, which is, of course, imperative for proper water management. And then we get up here and, when it comes to ceilings and roofs, I always say vent until you can't. So we have a vented roof here, even though it's a scissors truss. We spaced the boards out a little wider here to kind of mimic what we did on the wall. And then we had a brass screen in there, and we just bled our ventilated air in, and it goes up the chute. We have a full blown cellulose roof there. And the way we transitioned, this was a really cool transition. And I'll point out before I talk about this, a lot of my work is design build. So a lot of these things are pretty heavily detailed, but they're still awaiting, how can I say, site verification. Like, okay, we have a plan. We think we know how we're going to do it. We'll go out there and, Farley will cut a 12-inch piece of plywood, and then we'll run through the steps and say, okay, that worked like we planned, or we'll develop the necessary modifications to make it work better than our plan. And then he'll turn his guys loose and say, okay, do the rest of the house just like that. But what we did was we had a piece of 3/4 inch by 9-inch plywood, and we basically had it temporarily nailed to the wall. And then we ran an ice and water shield, or a membrane, in this case, I think it might even have been zip tape, ran it up over the top and ran it down the face of that plywood. And then we left it down there. Then we inserted the trusses. And after the trusses were installed, they took out the couple temporary nails and they flipped that up. And then they nailed it off to the bottom of the trusses. But what we had was, we had the zip tape, you can see it here, grabbing on and biting the air barrier on the outside. It traverses the framing at the top, and it is now on the back side here between the truss and that 3/4 inch flange. And then we can run a couple beads of acoustical sealant, attach the drywall to it, and fly up through the scissor truss down the other side to a mirror-like detail of what we have here, so that we maintain the continuity of using the drywall air barrier up and over the scissor truss. So we have that transition, and it worked out just as we had planned, and worked out that detail with Farley. I'd love to sit here and say I'm going to take credit for all this stuff, but I worked with some pure geniuses as contractors. And when we sit down at the table and we say, okay, this is where we need to end up, and this is kind of the ingredients we have, what's the recipe? And I'm always thrilled at, my job, because I get to work with fine people like that. So that's the general details of the wall section. I'm just going to breeze through. I know Ben's chomping at the bit. Just the set of plans for this one, because I think there's a lot of areas of transition and thought that went into this house that might not be as common. The foundation here was very simple, 800 square foot. There wasn't a whole lot of magic there. The floor framing here, there's a couple areas that I concern myself with, getting the stair opening right, having the beams aligned. In this case here, we did lay out all the plywood. Notice that we also laid out all the drains for the toilet to make sure that we were missing all of the plumbing there, and actually missing it on the tub there too. So that all of that stuff worked out. As far as the stair opening goes, here you go, Travis. I know you'll like this, but there's our stair detail to make sure that the rough opening and rough frame opening and everything that we're asking for does in fact work as we transition from one floor to the next via the stairway. And I call out what the rough stringers and rough treads are, etc., wall stiffeners, all of that stuff. So I view the drawings as one way to do it. Certainly open to making modifications, but I think we need to figure out at least one approach that we can then scrutinize. And of course, all the beam sizes here, when I size the beams, I just call them out what they are here, what rim board we're using, what headers we were using. We have, the floor plan, not a whole lot of magic, pretty straightforward stuff. The couple things about the trusses, this was the first time I was doing a Larson truss project. So we actually did a framing layout and we laid out all of the trusses, and Farley and I reviewed it just to make sure that we weren't missing something, or we were going to get to this point where we have 80 trusses sitting on site and we realized we should have done something else. So not only did we do that, but I also did a whole series of wall framing elevations that fully coordinated all of the window openings, and stud count, all of that stuff, how it ties in. You can see how it ties into all of the roof framing and how all of that stuff transitions, all the framing around the trusses. So, and then some of these places where it's a half wall at dormers and how those window openings all transition. And then of course, we talked earlier about ordering windows, but it's one thing to order the windows, but there is all this information that we have to transition from, say, this window to how big are the openings. So if we look at, say, W1 window is 2438, well, the rough opening is 1 inch larger than that. The plywood rough opening is a little larger than that it grows in 3/4 of an inch. And then we have what I call the two by stud rough opening. So the framer frames that, and then we slowly close that opening in until we put the window in. But everybody needs this information, and it's far easier, Travis, to calculate and understand what that information is rather than take an afternoon out and figure it out, right? That someone's figuring that out ahead of time. We also had this traverse roof system that, rather than get trusses made there, we went with trusses across the front, trusses across the back, and then we put a couple girder trusses in, and then we simply framed this. So we had a transition that went from a roof truss system to a conventionally framed system there. So we have the applicable dimensions and what we're doing there. And yeah, you can see that in the roof plan here. But other than that, I think that's it's a good idea of
So
transition.
Steve, do you send a cut list for your framers?
I don't, but I
You
could.
could.
I mean, it's pretty much here. Once you get it all, I mean, you have heights of jacks, you have heights of cripples. Yeah, it's all there. I mean, it's not. And honestly, I mean, some people would sit there and say, oh my God, it must take you forever to do this. It really, the first time I did it many moons ago, it did take a little while to figure it out. And here's the thing that I know you guys, will always question, as being an architect, do I really know how to frame? Right? Is the question, because there's things that, I don't know if I, like here, right? You have this wall. Well, we have the extra 5.5 inch wall. That's the long wall that gets stood up first, right? So we have to account for that 5.5 inches on both sides, so that the second stand up wall is the one that's 11 inches less, so that it stands up there. So we can take our information and we can provide it and do this work, but we have to ensure that, this is that career transition that I talked about, that there's a point where you think you know what you're doing. Oh yeah, I'm an architect. Of course I know how to frame a house. Well, no, you know how to put in studs in a wall section and show it. But do you know that the first stud is, 15 1/4 to the face, and, at 16 inches on center, right? Do you know those numbers? Do you know that you need to drop the 5.5 inches on the perp wall that comes in on the interior walls that you're standing up. So there's things like that, or the fact that some of these top plates run long and some of them run short, right? Because they're going to intersect and interlock as those walls get stood up. So all of that stuff, you have to be confident in what you're doing, but there's that transition in a person's career where, yeah, I mean, do I know as much as, framers? No, I don't, but I know how to lay out framing in a house, and all of these studs are coordinated with the roof trusses, and those are all coordinated with the floor framing members. So everything's working in concert with each other. And my job isn't necessarily to tell them how to frame. My job is to coordinate the floor framing with the wall framing with the truss framing on the outside, and make sure that, again, when we have 80 trusses sitting on the site, that they're the right length, that we have the position for them, and we know how we're going to install it, because that coordination effort has been thoroughly vetted. So there you go, Benjamin.
All right. I was just about to say, Steve, I love you to death, but you're boring me to tears. So if Steve will shut off his pretty pictures there, we can talk, or you can keep them up. I'm going to dovetail a little bit off of how Steve opened his comments. There is definitely a transition point in a person's career where you move from doing what you're taught to do to doing something because you understand how to do it. If you're just doing something because it's, in a drawing from a manufacturer, because it's the way somebody showed you previously, I encourage you to take the time and start researching whatever it is that you're doing to understand why you're doing it that way, because it's not uncommon for people to be taught incorrectly. So like Steve said, that we can talk about the physical building transitions, but there's a lot of other transitions in this industry that we deal with on a daily basis. Another big one is transitioning a client from the design phase to the actual build phase. That is a critical area that, if there's not good communication between the builder, the client, and the architect at that point, you're really missing out on a chance to help the project excel. That is the crucial phase, if you haven't been integrated from the beginning, where you can really make some leaps to kind of streamline the project as you go along. Doing things like Steve is talking about there, and laying out the framing as the contractor to understand where things are going to fall and try and catch things ahead of time. Looking through as many of the details as possible and tempering the client's expectations of what things are actually going to look like. A lot of times the architects will get fed design criteria by the client of what they want it to look like based off of a picture or whatever the inspiration is. And then the builder has to take whatever resources that they have available to them for supplies and for budget for that client, and try and translate that into the real world. And there can be a bit of a disconnect there, but it's important during that transition that you spend the time to try and catch those things and prompt your client and discuss with your architect, and hopefully have a pliable architect and client that communicate well, so that you can all resolve those things together. Because, a penny up front is saving a pound in 6 weeks. So, hold on, bear with me. I was jotting down notes as Steve was rambling along. When we talk about the physical execution of transitions, flat is easy, okay? Going flat across a wall with a WRB or an air barrier, or flat across a roof with your underlayment, whatever it is, whatever the material is you're using, flat is easy. If you can't do flat, you need to find a different career. The place where we run into issues is whenever we introduce a turn into something, making a turn around a corner with an air barrier becomes an area where we're introducing risk. Wherever we introduce a new material, so we have to transition from one material to the other, especially if this is a control layer. Transitioning from roofing to a cheek wall siding and making sure that that all comes together and everything plays nicely. Those are critical areas that we have to turn our attention to. And it really becomes critically important that, especially now with such a broad range of materials that we're dealing with in the field, that you really understand your materials before you start diving into the build, because you want to make sure that everything's compatible, because a lot of stuff doesn't play nice with one another. You know, you start using, you know, steel nails on copper flashing, you know, I'm sure everybody knows what happens there. Or you start using a rubberized asphalt flashing tape on a vinyl window flange, then you're just asking for trouble. It's going to melt that window flange over time. It's paying attention not only in how you execute, but in your homework ahead of time. So that's, like I was saying before, about spending that time with the architect before you actually get into the physical building, trying to understand their intents and relate that. Like Steve said, develop the recipe. You have the ingredients, now you need to develop the recipe, and you need to figure out if you can buy those ingredients, or, you know, if you have to make a substitution, is that recipe still going to work? Is the cake going to rise, or is it going to collapse when you take it out of the oven? You know, you really have to invest that time up front to, you know, work through all of those details as best as you possibly can. I'm kind of an oddball in a lot of ways in my approach to building. For myself, when I was running my own business, I will take a set of designs that I get from an architect or a designer, and I will then redraw essentially the entire thing in SketchUp, you know, not to every detail, but to work out that stuff that Steve was talking about. You know, how are my tub and my toilet waistlines laying out in that framing? Am I going to be able to make that work? Do I have to account for headering off? How, like the exterior eye joist, can I change my layout of my framing so that it ends up that I have, you know, plenty of space on either side of my window buck for insulation? It's taking the time to just, you know, maybe not in the finest grain detail, but kind of pencil that stuff out in SketchUp, or even if you do it on a notepad, and just try and work through as much of that as you can, because that's going to become your personal resource throughout the build to turn back to. And hopefully you've worked through a lot of that stuff. You know, Travis made that comment in the beginning about getting stair rises on a set of prints. He said, you know, he has to spend an afternoon figuring that out. What I try and do is I try and work all of that stuff out before we even show up to the job site, because, you know, as I'm running that job, my time is more expensive once that job is rolling. For me to take some downtime before that job even hits the ground and figure out these transitions, you know, everything from, you know, how is the vapor barrier, the capillary break happening at the footing, to how is that scotia molding dying into the belly band, or whatever it is in the house. Just try and mentally build the house in your mind and work through as much of it as you possibly can up front. So those are my wise words here. Steve, hopefully you can make me feel stupid.
Man, you made a lot of great points. I especially like the point of compatible materials, because I didn't touch on that. There's, you know, at Building Science, when I used to do a lot of building investigations, and that was more in the infancy of, we didn't really know to ask that question. We just assumed that any caulk can touch any material. But yeah, we've had some nightmare stories that I've witnessed. You know, you put an adhesive on extruded polystyrene and it literally melted it and cut it because it melted it so bad, right? And you just realize, okay, we're never using those two again. But yeah, you make a great point with that, certainly. And how we you know, there's another transition too that I think is really important, that is going to be in the talk that Justin is going to talk about with Building Science Fight Club and Justin. But how do we transition information? I know Joe at Building Science was always extremely concerned with this, and it's, as I get older, it certainly has become a concern of mine. But, you know, and I'll use myself as an example. My daughter just started working with me. So I have 30 years of experience. She has 6 months. I'm not planning on going anywhere anytime soon, but there is going to be a transition time where she's in charge and I'm having fun and doing some things. But how do we transition information as mentors to the people that don't necessarily know, so that they can transition from I think I know to yes, I do know. Right. And there's a lot of great people out there throwing information out there, Mike Gertens of the world saying, hey, look what I did here. Don't ever do this, do it this way. And I learned that 15 years ago or 60 years ago with his brother or something, some MacGyver story. Right. I always tease him that you leave him on an island with a 2x4, a rubber band, and, a baseball cap, and he'd build a sailboat and find his way home. But really, I think it's extremely important that for those of you that hold your cards really tight to your chest, that we need to share this information, and it's all information. If we screw something up, share it and talk about how things have gone bad, but we need to share the really good information too, so that, like Peter Yost would say, none of us is going to live long enough to see every problem. So we need to share information.
And it's also
transition that.
To add on to that, Steve, it's also be curious about what you do. Be curious about the materials you work with.
I'm always very curious about what you're doing.
I know you are. I know you are. It's trying to have some sense of, curiosity, I guess is the best way for me to phrase it, about everything in this industry, because the more you can draw in, whether it's, directly related to what you're working on or just something that pops into your head, the more you can absorb about materials and processes in this industry, related or not, it helps your career, because you may run into a situation where all of a sudden you're like, hey, I saw this, maybe I can use this to accomplish that. So, people like to, maybe I shouldn't say this, people get into a rut sometimes where they learn the materials that they know and they just use those. And when an architect or a designer or a client throws something new at them, it's like the world exploded. The stuff that I live for in my day-to-day job is the stuff that I've never done before. That's what keeps it interesting for me. And that ability is what I think allows me personally to accomplish a lot of the things that I do, is because I try and have a broad understanding of the entire industry and the materials that are out there in the marketplace, so I can pull these things together to execute those dreams and those visions of the architect and the client. So stay inquisitive, question things, dive into things, get lost down rabbit holes.
Yeah, get yourself in trouble, because it's usually that's where you find the most opportunity.
Try something hard.
But get yourself in trouble on paper, not out there after the concrete is poured.
Or on your own house.
More expensive. Yeah, your own house. Go build a 10 by 10 shed out in the backyard. Do all your testing and stuff on that. I mean, that's where building science gets half of its ground knowledge, right? They have the shack out and back. They build it. Coda goes out there. You got the mad scientist working on the shed. And I don't even care if he's listening, but I always tell people, I worked many years with Coda. He has my highest respect, but I always explain Coda as he is the closest transition of computer to human being I know. When I worked with him, I would just literally turn around and say, hey, Coda, I need that house we're working on. I just need a rough size of the return. He's like, I haven't calculated it yet. I go, I know. That's why I'm asking for a rough size, Coda. No, well, let me calculate it. And I would literally have to wait an hour. Coda doesn't give rough information. He doesn't give guesses. He gives the exact, and then the calculation is something like, oh yeah, it's like 10 and 7/16 by 8 and 3/16, but we can probably just go with an 8 by 11. Thanks, Coda. Been waiting on this for about an hour. But
go try to pick that up at your supply house. That 8 by 11. Are you trying to buy paper? Because you're not gonna have it.
You guys talked about transitions from the architect to the builder on the field, right? And I talk a lot about integrated design, and Christoph mentioned something about transitioning that also to your mechanical contractors and everybody else. But I think we're also missing the transition back to the architect after construction or during construction, because, we're not on the site every day. And sometimes we don't know if something didn't go well or if it did go well, and so sometimes you're either repeating bad details or not repeating good details if you, don't get that transition dump after the project. Like, hey, these 10 things went well and these couple of things didn't. So I think that's another.
So Emily, do you make a point? I honestly, I make a point. If the framer is, say, projected to be done next Wednesday, I'll go out to the job site next Monday, climb up on the roof, hang out with them and sit there and say, you framed this house. Was there anything that I should have changed? Were there notes I should have added to the drawings? Is there stuff that was on there that you didn't use or didn't need? But I think that, I would label it as validation, like closing that loop. But
I do. I'm going to point out two things to you. One, it's definitely that transition period where now, after being in business for 11 years, I feel more comfortable doing that, going out and saying that. And two, as a woman in the field, it's just a little bit harder to go out there because you have to feel like you have to feel like everything, and it's sometimes hard to ask, but I just kind of have gotten over that barrier and just say, you know what, I don't care if I look stupid because I'm going to look even dumber if we do this again. So I'm going to go out and I'm going to ask those questions and do that. So I do make a point of that. And, as far as building science goes, which is something that a lot of architects don't do, is I also make a point of, I tell the contractor from the beginning, I'm going to show up at all these points. I want to see air sealing details. I want to see the insulation before you put the sheetrock up. Like, I want to know when all these things are happening so that I can come. I want to see any insulation that's going to be buried before you backfill or pour a slab or do those things. So I definitely do that. But there's still some things that I think that you don't always catch. So I
will tell you this, Emily, that there's stereotyping and honestly, with my daughter working with me, that is in the back of my mind, that her education has to be such that she needs to go out there and earn respect and not just play the role of an architect, but actually know what she's talking about. But the flip side of stereotyping, and Ben, you're going to love this. I'll climb up on, a roof or something, sit there, and the guy will be like, "Oh, hey, how you doing, man? Who are you? What are you, the plumber or the roofer?" I'm like, "No." And he's like, "Oh, you must be the plumber then." "No." "Well, are you the drywaller?" I'm like, "No." He's like, "Okay, who the F are you?" And I'm like, "Oh, I'm the architect." And then I get, "Really?" I get it all the time.
It's very rare that I've ever had an architect climb up on a roof. And Emily, for me,
I'm like a cat.
I'm sure you are. Yeah.
I hate roofs. I'd actually ask Ben to come down. Could you just come down here and talk to me?
Right.
From my end, that conversation with the architect happens if they come to me looking for it. And it's not like they have to be like, "Hey, how did that detail work?" It's just having an architect that's present for that conversation. It's all too common in the industry that we get a set of prints at pre-construction, we work through them, sort out any details. Maybe we have one or two hiccups throughout it, and then the architect's just non-existent.
That's another transition that I think is the hard part of being the architect, that this is a client to architect to client to builder transition, is that we're usually the first people voted off the island too. I think somebody said that in a previous week, is that, they feel like they paid you to do all this stuff. You figured it out. You've done that. And so,
but that's part of that early construction conversation that you have between the client, the architect, and the builder, is it's trying to get everybody to understand, the client to understand, that you would like the architect to remain part of the process.
I also think that as architects, we need to just come to the job site, whether we're being paid to do it, because it's a disservice to us to not learn things on the job site.
It's your due diligence.
Part of your education, not part of the job.
Correct.
Yeah. Honestly, the architects that show up on the job site for me are the ones that I want to work with again. If I get a set of prints and it's like pre-construction conversation and then they're just a ghost and I never see them again, I don't want to see another set of their prints. They might be, it's the truth, and it might be great prints, but I want to have that dialogue. I need that dialogue throughout the process from an architect, because it makes my job easier and it helps me to deliver a better product if I can have that conversation. because there are just this, this comment that we had at the beginning about the stair dimensions on a set of prints was prescient of what we're discussing. I would much rather have somebody else work those details out for me with the intent that they have than me stand in the field, try and scratch out what I think is going to make something happen. I have, a crew, I have subs showing up, I have material deliveries, I have machinery that I'm all trying to juggle while at the same time work out a set of details. And I might not be able to give it my entire focus that they deserve. So it's nice to have architects that, are involved.
Yeah, absolutely. There's a whole bunch of stuff going on in the chat box, and two things I picked up. Doug mentioned their biggest issue is the transition between two crews, like between the roofing crew and the siding crew. Are you guys finding that too? It's like between subcontractors, the transition between subcontractors. And I actually heard something today. A friend of mine is an instructor in a construction tech department, and he said, he just showed up there. He's new at the head of the construction tech department, and he said, I don't understand. The architecture department doesn't talk to the construction department, who doesn't talk to the plumbing department, that doesn't talk to the electrical department. So they're starting, in some cases, starting this even just in the school. Like, why is this not totally integrated?
That transition between subs for me is if there's issues there, and I'm sorry, Doug, if this is hitting close to home, if there's issues there in those transitions, that falls onto the project manager. Because it's the project manager's responsibility to make sure that information is transferred between subs and between the client and between the architect and between the engineer and whoever is at the table. That's the project manager or the project superintendent's job. So if there's a disconnect there between them, that's on the management.
You just summed up.
I would agree, Ben.
General
I tell everybody, there's only one driver on the bus, right? There's a lot of people driving it, but there's only one driver. You cannot have everybody just kind of running ragged. One person has to be coordinating all efforts out on the job site.
Mm-hmm. Then it just falls apart if there's not. And I've watched it over and over and over again. Or even if you're trying to hand off between a couple of people running a project, unless you guys are really tight and you've got your systems dialed in, it's just asking for trouble.
Yeah.
Totally.
One of the other. Go ahead.
Or just, this is, I totally expected this conversation to entirely be about like what product are we using when we go from floor to wall. Like I had no idea where we're going to go to this, but it's awesome. It's great. That's why I love BS and Beer, because I never know where we're going to go with things. Just a couple of comments. One is this all kind of relates to like in permaculture design. They talk about the interesting things happen at the edges and at transitions, so that can be physical, but it's also in construction. Just there are a lot of people involved in building a house, especially a big house or a good house, and just being able to have all those parts align and move smoothly from one to the other. Just it's a very complex thing, and everyone, almost every custom house is a prototype. So it's not like you've built this house 5 times before, and most of us in the high performance world compulsively have to reinvent the wheel. So we're always trying doing different things. And so then it's like, so I've been like, do it like we did last time. It's let's try this way. And then it's just, it gets complicated. But Carol Stenberg had a good question is because there are so many transitions and passing of the batons, is design build an answer? Like, is it easier when things are all under one roof?
I mean, I would say so design build is one of those things where it kind of has multiple levels too, right? There's the design build where there's people that have an architect working directly for that construction company. I would argue 90% of my work is design build, in that 90% of my work is probably through 5 or 6 contractors. And so there are some times where, I don't draw that detail. I just tell, Jim, hey, we're going to do this one just like we did the Joneses over there, how we did that eave. We'll just do that, and we'll use the same gutter, or we'll change it like this. But it's really easy for that. But I think that certainly helps minimize, because now your transitions are translated to experience. So when I talked about that career transition of where I thought I knew to I actually know, it's working in the expectations. Like if I chose to, God forbid, work for any length of time with Ben, we would grow to understand our strengths. And then I would be able to say, yeah, just do this like that. And then I wouldn't have a problem. I wouldn't have to do the detail. But that's because that transition has matured to a level of, very sincere trust. So, and I think that's what that design build has going for it.
For me, just to speak a little bit about design build, when I was in business for myself before moving up here to Maine, I operated as a design build because it allowed me to be the control freak, to be the OCD person that I am, to control all these details ahead of time and work through them. It puts a lot of eggs into one basket, though. You either have to be a very nimble company and also profitable to be able to absorb some of that design time in the early stages, or you have to be a large enough company like Steve was talking about, that you have an in-house architect working for you. So it can work. Yeah, it's nice to have everybody sitting under the same roof as you're putting a project together. Is it the answer? It's an answer.
Mm-hmm.
I think it doesn't have to be design build if you've selected either the right architect or the right contractor, or you're that special client that actually pays attention to everything. But you need one of those three parties involved to actually care about all of it. And I always tell my clients that the whole purpose of my position, the only reason that I exist on the job, is these transitions, is the framer talking to the roofer, talking to the siding contractor. Because if you could just call the framer and have him frame the house, and he would do that kick-out flashing, and then the siding guy would show up and put up the WRB and put up his siding, and then the roofer wouldn't tear off the damn kick-out flashing so that he could make his roof easier, then you don't need me, because everyone just does what they're supposed to do. But if you don't have an architect who goes out to the site like Steve and gets on the roof and says, hey, what the hell's going on here? Where are my kick-out flashings? What the hell? Why isn't there a cricket here? I don't understand what happened. Which I know that's not what you said, Steve. You go up and you ask the questions to try and do better. But I'm saying here's the experience I have with architects in the field. I've had two that ever came out to see my build. One of them was the homeowner. And so, of course, we had lots of conversations on her job, and she did a fantastic job of us working together. And the other one was a guy who thought he was smarter than anyone else in the world, who came out to tell me all the terrible things I was doing to ruin his experience with the client. And I told the client that I was going to have to be fired. I was like, you got to let me go, man. Just fire me on this job. It's not going to work out. Your architect and I cannot get along. They want me to redo all this work. That's fine, because they don't understand the difference between that board's dirty and that board is rotten, and stuff like that. And there's bad contractors and there's bad architects and there's definitely bad clients. But if you have one of the three that cares about these transitions and will watch every single one of them and make sure that, hey, if the client's the one that goes and says, hey, I paid Steve to draw these plans and these details are awesome, it doesn't look like they're getting built, what's going on? And they hold the contractor's feet to the fire, good on them. And vice versa. If it's the builder, if it's the architect, but you got to have somebody that cares all the way through the process, and then it can all work. But if anybody's sleeping at the wheel, failure's coming.
Well, I think and all good projects really are design build, right? The architect and the builder are together at design development, like maybe you're not involved in like every possible scenario of the dream idea, right? But you narrow it down to a plan and you move forward. They're all design build. If the builder's on board during the design phase, the architect is on board during construction, everybody is happy.
I wouldn't say that all good projects are like that. What I would say is that if you have that conversation from the get-go, you can make a good project a great project, and you can make a great project an exceptional project. So, you can still have a phenomenal project if not everybody's communicating and, we don't have this whole integrated approach. You can still pull it off. It's, it's been going on for decades like that. But it's when you have that communication that you can really make a project sing.
Okay, fair.
Hey, let's I was reading through this. There's one here that really, boy, I'm doing all I can to keep both feet on the ground. But Shelby, wrote, my issue with architecture is that it's hard to justify when all the people around here have trouble affording a 250K home. I think one of the biggest problems, Shelby, is that when people look at architecture, but building or the building industry in general, everything to them is a cost, right? That builder costs more than that builder. So I'm going to go with the cheaper guy. The architect costs additional money. A structural engineer costs more money. No, to me, it's all about perspective. The difference between builder A and builder B is that builder B is potentially a better investment, right? I'm going to have fewer mistakes. I'm going to have a better built structure, right? I'm sure, Shelby, as a builder, you don't walk in talking to your client saying, you should hire me because I'm the cheapest, shittiest builder on the block. And I'm going to build this house as cheap as I possibly can so you can afford to build the biggest possible home you can. You don't say that. You go in there telling people that you're the best builder out there. You're the right one for the job. You're not like all the other hacks in town. And I'm not, Shelby, please understand, I'm not picking on you personally. I'm coming off the comment that you wrote because I meet people like this in everywhere USA. And that architects and structural engineers, just like plumbers and good builders, we're all investments. And when you start seeing all of our services as a cost, then that's, I think, where the problem originates. Because I think that if you came to me and said, hey, I want to build this 250K home, I would find a way to get my fees in alignment with what we need to do to provide that person a really good house. It doesn't have to be this flat $1 million fee just because you're building a less expensive house. But I think that architects would certainly offer some investment in just the planning and coordination. Having another set of eyes looking at it, I think, is important. So
to that effect, Mike and I actually worked on a project together where the clients were on definitely a constrained budget that they had to hit. So they bought a set of pre-made plans off the internet, gave them to Mike. Mike spent a little bit of time tuning them to, fit their needs. And we were able to deliver what I think is a really phenomenal house, a house that has character, that has good performance, and that they absolutely love. So it doesn't have to be the all-in thing. It's also, like Steve said, it really is a matter of perception. There are going to be people that want to buy the Pulte homes of the world and the Toll Brothers homes of the world. And then there's also going to be the people that consider architecture an investment that they believe in. There's going to be people that see what living in a quality crafted and designed home does for your life and for your well-being and just your perception of the world around you. So it is definitely a perspective thing. And it is also a market thing. If you are in an area where it's blue collar and it's, people struggling to buy a middle of the road house, architecture is going to be a hard sell. But those are the places where you can do kind of, like I said, the stuff with Mike, tweak a set of pre-made plans or just, have an architect put together a really bare bones set of prints for you. They don't have to be fully detailed out to, every detail, and find a contractor that you believe in and that matches your budget that you're comfortable working with to be able to deliver, something in between. A trained professional architect is going to be able to bring more to a design in a short period of time than the world's greatest contractor.
I don't think I've ever heard a builder say that.
It's the truth. It's what they get paid for. I have great opinions, but I'm not gonna. I can't do what Steve does. And Steve can't do what I do. It's just it's the matter of it.
I tried growing it. This is as long as it gets.
No, buddy. It's cute.
So our friend Steve Demetric wants to bring it back to a more practical note. He's asking about opinions on transitions between acrylic adhesive flashing tapes and liquid applied flashings. I know Ben has some experience with this on the zip end. Any compatibility issues, or is it just a sequencing issue?
I don't see, well, okay, so here's the thing is we need to clarify what we're using for a liquid applied flashing, because there's different compounds that we're using if you're in the STP,
Let's say,
if you're in the STPE family or silicone family, you're probably going to be okay. I still prefer to have a positive lap when I have a tape coming over a fluid applied. So if you're like fluid applying your sill, I'd rather have the jam flashings come down over top of that than vice versa. With zip in particular, you have to wipe the tape with a solvent before you apply liquid flash. If you're having it flash over the tape, if the tape's pre-installed, you have to clean it because there's a release agent on the tape. So chemical compatibility wise, I don't think there's any issues. If you're using, an asphaltic based fluid applied flashing, I first off recommend you to steer away from that anyways. You might have some compatibility issues with different tapes, but for the most part, I tend towards acrylic tapes for everything I possibly can because they have so few compatibility issues. And shut up.
I do that. Don't do that then. Like, I love that bit of old doctor advice. Like, oh, you're using two products that don't go together. Don't do that. Like, we can just eliminate all these questions if you just don't do that.
How about just don't do stupid things?
Yeah, and this is one of those things as you dive more and more into the materials that we use in projects, you start to learn that there's classes and families and styles and types of products that don't work as well as other ones. And it on a broad scale, it helps you to kind of tune your directions, or at least be able to lob a spitball across the room on a solution and have some sort of faith that it's going to perform well, even if you're kind of out of your depth in it.
Someone just posted in the chat, which sorry, this is going a little bit back to what we have, is how do we convince clients that better construction is worth it when they can't see into the future problems, which is a problem in our industry in general, right? Is, building things that aren't lasting that long, right? And people maybe not staying in a house for more than 5 to 7 years, selling it, and then the next homeowner inherits the issue. What do you see as far as the transitions to convincing people? Like, how do we convince them that?
That's the difference between somebody who buys a set of kitchen knives from Walmart and somebody that goes out and buys a $200 Japanese chef's knife. It's perception. It's what perceived values are. You're always going to have people that are not going to invest in quality construction because they're trying to hit a price point and they're only there for 5 years or whatever it is, and that's going to continue to exist. Code can push some of that forward. Whether that's the right solution, I don't know, but it's always going to exist.
Yeah,
it's a marketing niche is really what a lot of this is. High performance work and the high end work is you have to kind of find your way into that market because it's not widespread.
As designers and architects, how much do you think we should be trying to simplify things? Just, transitions are, the fewer materials and fewer layers we have, the fewer transitions we have to worry about. So, Steve showed an awesome assembly, but it's complicated. There are lots of parts and pieces. Shelby's saying that
that one was driven by a
yeah,
lot of complicated issues. So, but I hear you. I'm just saying, not that I'm jumping on it.
Or no, and I'm not criticizing it. I think it's
criticizing it. I still love you in the morning.
No, it's a great house and a great detail, but it's not simple. Shelby's saying that hempcrete allows as few as 4 layers in the entire assembly, and just removes a lot of these transition issues. Is that something? So that just as sort of two ends of the spectrum, is simplifying things something we should be prioritizing if we're focused on the design end of things, or should we just be focused on making sure the information is clear?
Make sure the information's clear. I don't care how complex it is. If you've thought through it beforehand, at least it's going to give me a fighting chance to execute it.
But one of the things I pride myself on, Mike, personally is I always claim most of my houses can be built from the lumber yard, right? Maybe not the European windows, but the idea that I try not to get too crazy. It's that project aside, I picked that one just because it had some cool details and made for good conversation. But you know, doing a simple house and framing it with 2x6 24-inch on center and putting R6 on the outside of the wall or R9 on the outside of the wall is a really damn good wall. You know, one of my mantras is keep it simple, others will complicate it for you, which, you know, all you have to do is work on a couple projects and you'll figure that out in a heartbeat, that there's always somebody out there willing to figure it out. The one thing that comes to mind that I always make an argument for, it's funny because the more information you put up, the more bite it gets, right? So I do some videos with Matt, and this certainly isn't a plug on that, but you put something up on YouTube, we get tons of trolls. Oh my God, that's a dumb idea. Why wouldn't you do this? Why would you do that? Boy, that's god awful, or whatever. Green Building Advisor has them too, right? That's a dumb idea. I would never do that. But the reality is, for me, something is always going to be the worst part of the building, right? So we could sit there, we could chase every thermal break or try to, and we can change this. But at some point, you have to stop and say, this is simple, it's buildable, it fits the budget, it works well, it checks off all the big boxes. Now, is it still maybe a little thermal break there? Yeah, maybe. And I'll give you one specific example. Over insulating the frames of windows. I had one that had a problem. I will never do it again. When we did Dan Roy's house, he actually ran the numbers. It saved like an additional like $5 a year on the energy bill, right? It cost about $60 a window to do, and 30 windows. So the return on investment is absolutely crazy. Cut your losses, install the window, and say, yeah, the frame's going to be the worst part of the house, but I can live with that, right? I don't need to overcomplicate that detail and add 3 more layers. And oh, by the way, a 6-inch screw now to put up a piece of trim. It's crazy.
This kind of harkens back, and I hope that I don't offend my passive house friends in the audience here.
No, go ahead, beat them up. I got you back on this.
So, well, you mentioned, Steve, there in your slab detail of that house that you were showing all those, you know, the large amounts of foam and so on and so forth. I've had a bone to pick with passive house for a lot of years. A lot of people know this, and it's gotten better over time about it. But there comes a point where, and this goes right back to the pretty good house principles that we talk about here all the time, is you're penny wise, but you're pound foolish. You know, we start spending all this effort, and, you know, especially if we start looking at embodied carbon, let alone the payback on it, you know, we start dumping all of this material in to chase every little thermal bridge and every little potential moisture risk. We have to kind of, you know, call it at some point, you know.
Be careful, everyone. Ben's about to sell you vinyl siding. Be careful.
I mean, I've told you that story before. Yeah,
I love that story.
Yeah,
it's perfect, though. It harkens back to what we were talking about before we got started here about, well, no, it doesn't. I'm sorry. I do.
You guys,
we have to be pragmatic about this. It is. If you have more money than anything else and you want to chase every little bit, then go for it. And this is not me.
That's a plug for Mike. And
thanks, Steve. I appreciate it.
Right? Pretty good house versus passive.
That's awesome.
House.
That last 10% is going to take 90% of the effort.
Yeah, and it's going to take a lot of dollars, a lot of complication, cause, you know, it's going to double the amount of transitional speak and coordination to get that last 10%. And I'm with you. I mean, I've done a bunch of passive houses, but I've done 5 times more passive houses that I still call passive houses that aren't certified.
Same.
Right? Just because.
So I agree with Carol in the chat. She wants us to go back to transition issues. And I agree. Let's go back. There was a great question earlier on about the difficulty of transitioning when we do additions on existing homes. So you're transitioning from new construction to existing. And that's an excellent question. I face that all the time. I have my solutions, but I bet you guys are smarter than I am. Tell me how you manage these transitions, Ben.
I say treat the addition like it's a new house. Don't chase your tail. Don't make bad decisions because you have 3,000 square feet of bad decisions, and the next 1,000 square feet, you're just going to copy those.
I guess the best thing I can say is try and build in places where you give yourself a little bit of fudge factor, where it ties together, and where you connect the two together, leave the level in the truck that day. Like it's really, my dad told me this years ago when I was learning how to work in old houses. He says, just leave the level in the truck and trust your eye, because it really does come into play. Eventually you have to stop fussing over, I'm inside the lines, but it's not perfectly centered. And you have to say, you know what, this looks pretty good. This is an 80-year-old house tying to a brand new addition. This looks pretty good.
That's serving your client, because what your client's going to do is not go get their 6-foot Stabila. They're going to stand in the kitchen at the island and go, boy, that looks amazing. Nice job, Ben. Way to go, Steve. So if it looks good, it is good.
Or you're going to bring that Stabila and you're going to make that thing perfectly plumb, and then you're going to have 1.5 inches to nothing filler in between a door jamb leg.
Chip it out plaster.
And the client's going to go, what the hell is going on right there? It's,
my work's plumb though. I'm proud of my plumb work.
Yeah, I can sleep at night.
You know what else is an interesting transition is new materials, right? And how quick we are to transition to them. I know Shelby's thrown up the CTLs, hempcrete, and all of this. And, one of my long-standing arguments is we've been building with wood for 300 years and still haven't figured it out. And yet we're still trying to figure out, are there other ways to avoid using wood? I mean, wood's a pretty damn good product, right? It's a renewable resource. It's easy to work with. We've been working with it for a long time. I'm always torn with, do we jump to the next best thing? And I'll just use hempcrete as an example. Or do we sit there and say, let's just figure out the very best way to build an uncomplicated wood wall that will stand the test of time and work well? So,
and get the industry to understand how to do it
And get
before
the
we start
industry.
throwing something
It's-
new into it. And I'm all for new products and novel approaches and stuff like that, because I think there's a place in the industry for them to push the dialogue forward. But whether or not we need to see a paradigm shift to a totally new construction method, I think that's short-sighted.
I don't think we need to worry about that.
No.
When it comes to new products.
Me either.
and
I don't think that's going to happen.
the one comment of nobody wants to use real wood. I recently did a project a couple of years ago that was, let's call it a non-chemical, non-adhesive project. And you want to talk about a nightmare of a project and transitional hell, like the structural engineer, you send him the drawings and say, no plywood, nothing. Everything is board sheathing. And he's like, really? He's like, are you sure you want to do this? Do you understand how much engineering is involved in that? Yes, please do it. Went to the framer. Guess what I got? Really? No plywood? All board sheathing? Do you realize how much this is going to cost to install? Yes, we do. Please do it. It's one of those things where we can do that stuff, but there's challenges when you get out of the middle lane, right? There's a big challenge. And transition that, that there's the moral struggle of deciding to use this material over that material. And it's a challenge, because there's some places where the one that you don't want to use is the one that's most abundant and the one that's the least expensive. And the clients look at you like, why are you specifying this if it's twice the price? Right. And that's a hard argument to make, a real hard argument.
But also don't take this as shunning of trying new things, because like I said before, we really
Every
do
one of
need
your
to
comments,
stay
you
open.
preface it with, don't be offended, but offend people, man.
Go ahead and offend them.
The filter is on, Steve. The
Punch
filter.
them. Just punch them in the face.
Didn't have enough beer yet.
Up at you.
Yeah.
Tell them how you feel.
I'm trying to be nice. No, we do need to keep pushing forward. And I personally try and push my career in a direction where I kind of ride that fringe edge, where I'm trying new stuff and I'm trying to push boundaries and see what's out there, because on a practical level, it allows me to bring it back to the industry through venues like this and the other places that I teach and speak, and kind of share some of that. And, it allows me to cherry pick out what I think is, applicable to a broader scale. So do ride that edge, and, but is it going to be the solution for everybody? No. And it's honestly, it's taken me 20 plus years to get my career into a position where I have the ability to have those clientele and those jobs where I can do this type of work. It's not out there for everybody. But if it's what you're interested in, chase it, because you'll be able to get there.
Well, and I think you made a great point too on the Modern Craftsman podcast. If you haven't listened to it recently, Ben just did a podcast on there.
Oh my God, it took me a week to get through that one.
Those ones, they're like all 3 hours long.
Yeah.
It's an investment of time. You know,
I
but
was
he made
drunk by the end of it. That's why I got
the point you made there was, though, there are people in the industry who have to be doing those things so that we can make it available to other people
Yeah.
and make it, you know, and so I think there's a really valid point there that we can't stop the progress to, you know, and there's a great, you know, 10 years ago, nobody was putting solar on their houses. It was a non-starter, right? So, I mean, the industry will push forward, and there have to be those couple of people who are pushing that forward. But for everybody else, we're still working with the technology that maybe those people figured out 10 or 15 years ago, and hopefully we can, you know, still try to do it well. But we are at the last 5 minutes of the show, so I'd like to ask both of you. I know it goes by fast. To give your final words, your final thoughts on transitions and this concept, and you know, what's your final takeaway?
I mean, I'll start, Ben.
Go for it.
You know, because I'm probably one of I guess I am the oldest on the panel here. But one of the things that I find the most interesting about my career is I was fortunate to start at Building Science Corporation. And the most interesting thing is the things that we're arguing about today, we argued about 25 years ago at the conference table at Building Science, and Joe was making arguments for it, and air tightness, can't make buildings too tight, you know, all of this, what is a great ventilation rate, should we use spray foam or not, all these things. It's that our industry corners like a freight train, so don't expect the transition to come overnight, because it doesn't. It is an extremely slow moving mob that will take a very, very long time.
To just kind of take that, I don't know if it's totally related to transitions, but and it's gone. Yeah.
Hey, we'll just wait till you figure it out.
Yeah. I don't know if that's ever going to happen.
I don't think so either.
Yeah, it's gone. Sorry, brain fart.
It's okay. He's already transitioned to the next thing that he's doing, right? Which is basically what the rest of us are. I was like, "What's for dinner? What's the next thing?" I'm gonna
Nice save, Emily.
Yeah, I'm in
me all the time.
I'm in the middle of moving and changing jobs right now, so it's like
You said lots of great stuff. You don't need to have a closing thought.
Yeah.
Steve summed it up.
I'll borrow Cindy's comment, which is I have seen a huge transition in the past 2 years to way more interest in building science, which I think that's true. It's or just more publicly available. Like it's, I know Steve's been doing building science for 25 years, and I've been doing it for five or 10 years, but it's sort of hitting the mainstream now, and that's really cool. That the effort you put in 25 years ago is finally paying off, and that it's getting more mass adoption. So I
think the fact that the latest round of code issues is actually starting to address things like air tightness, vapor transmission, and all of these things that and whether they enforce it or not, but the fact that they're putting the words out there and the concepts out there to be thought about forces us all to think about it. And I'm going to tip my hat to the BS and Beer crew. It's, you know, people like you that provide, you know, avenues of education, like here tonight, by bringing people like me and Ben on here to have a discussion, share some thoughts. It's really important to, you know, cut that radius of the freight train down, Mike. And, you know, you guys are doing a really great job at it. So I commend you all at BS and Beer and all of the satellites down in Springfield and Kansas City and Tennessee and out west that, you know, keep up the great work. because
Thank
I
you very much.
appreciate it.
I got it. I got it back. Okay, so here's my thought. Great. So I think that there's a lot of discussion in the industry that we're somehow going to save the world by some sort of new form of construction. And there's a lot of attention being paid to smarter construction and low carbon, so on and so forth. This is just me being the brutal pragmatist that I am. We're not going to save the world, plain and simple. But what you can do is you can give your life purpose if this is what interests you. So by all means, chase it, but don't delude yourself with the thought that you're going to save the world.
That's fair.
That's
Cool.
it.
Hey, I'm going to shout out to my good friend, Bill Robinson. Thank you, Bill. I was down there last week, man. We limited out on everyday fishing. We filled the boat, stole some from your Mississippi. It was a great time.
All right. Thanks a lot, guys. We really appreciate it. Your time and sharing your expertise.
Yeah,
Thanks
thanks
to
for
the audience.
Thanks for
Thanks.
coming, everybody.
thanks for coming on. Thanks for sharing, and it'll be up on YouTube. And I think Kylie this week pushed a podcast, right? For people who want to listen at work. Oh,
That's right.
Travis, way to go. Got it all.
I'm still
Hey, if you
halfway.
put the elbow above the shoulder, it looks even bigger. You know that. Above the shoulder. That's the trick.
I'll trust you, Steve.
Of course, a Marine would know that.
Hoorah.
It's all about perception there, Benjamin.
You know it.
Thanks, guys. Appreciate
Thanks,
it.
Thanks, everybody.
All righty.
Have a good night.
Good night.